The storm had been building for years, not just in the darkening Nebraska sky. American soil, once sacred ground for generations of calloused hands, had become just another commodity on spreadsheets in gleaming coastal towers. Lightning cracked the horizon as the old farmer watched flames consume the barn his grandfather raised. Like everything else, it was slipping through his fingers. 60 days. That's how long he had left before the land that had witnessed his birth, marriage, and deepest grief would belong to strangers. 4 generations of sacrifice reduced to a dollar amount he could never pay. The banker's voice still echoed in his ears. Nothing personal, just business. But for men like him, men who had bled into this soil, who had buried wives beneath its oak trees, it was never just business. He didn't know that the motorcycle rumbling down his gravel drive carried more than a stranded traveler. It carried war, revolution. And perhaps, if the God he still reluctantly prayed to was merciful, one last chance at redemption. Some battles are fought with guns, others with patents and algorithms. This one would be fought with both. The sky darkened ominously over Heartland County, Nebraska, as Jack Miller steered his ancient John Deere tractor toward the farmhouse. At 62, his weathered face had seen more seasons than he cared to count, and his instincts told him this summer storm would be vicious. Lightning cracked across the horizon, illuminating the rolling fields of corn that, despite his best efforts, looked pitiful compared to years past. The drought had been merciless. A sharp pain shot through his lower back, a permanent souvenir from his Gulf War service, exacerbated by last year's surgery that had drained what little savings he'd managed to squirrel away. Jack adjusted his position on the hard seat, grimacing. The medication that dulled the pain waited in the kitchen cabinet, but he'd been stretching the prescription, taking half doses to make it last. At Medicare prices, even with his VA benefits, refills weren't cheap. Another bolt of lightning struck closer, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that made the tractor shudder. Jack squinted through the windshield, which was now being pelted by the first heavy drops of rain. That's when he saw it, an orange glow flickering from the storage barn. His heart lurched. "Damn it to hell," he muttered, accelerating the tractor as much as the old machine would allow. The barn housed not only feed for his remaining livestock, but irreplaceable equipment that had been in the Miller family for generations. Equipment he could never afford to replace. As he approached, the situation became clear. Lightning had struck the corner of the metal roof, igniting the dry hay stored beneath it. Flames were already climbing the wooden support beams. Jack killed the tractor's engine and leaped down, ignoring the screaming protest from his back. Inside the barn, his 3 remaining dairy cows were lowing in panic. Rain hammered against his denim jacket as he sprinted to the water pump. Dragging the heavy fire hose toward the barn, with trembling hands he connected it and turned the valve. The ancient pump groaned to life, but the water pressure was weak, another piece of infrastructure he hadn't been able to afford upgrading. "Come on, you old bastard," he growled at the pump, willing it to work harder as he directed the pathetic stream toward the base of the flames. The fire hissed in defiance, momentarily retreating before surging again. Jack fought with grim determination, maneuvering through the barn to release the frightened cows while battling the growing blaze. The smoke burned his lungs, and his eyes stung as he pushed deeper into the structure, knowing that losing this barn would be another nail in his farm's coffin. The first cow bolted past him into the rain, but the other 2 were trapped behind a fallen beam that now blocked the main passage. Jack could feel the heat intensifying, the crackling of the fire growing louder as it consumed more of the dry timber. His lungs screamed for clean air, but he couldn't leave the animals. With a surge of adrenaline that temporarily masked his back pain, Jack heaved against the smoldering beam. The weight was immense, and for a moment he feared he wouldn't be able to move it. Then he remembered what his father had told him when he was just a boy helping with his first barn raising. "It's not about strength, Jack, it's about leverage." Bracing his shoulder against the wall, Jack used his legs to push, finally creating enough space for the terrified animals to squeeze through. They thundered past him into the stormy night, leaving him alone in the burning structure. The exit was now 20 feet away, obscured by thickening smoke. Jack dropped to his knees, crawling beneath the worst of it, each movement sending fresh spikes of pain through his back. A support beam groaned overhead, a warning he recognized from his construction days. The roof section was about to collapse. With a final desperate lunge, Jack rolled through the barn door just as a deafening crash announced the partial collapse of the roof behind him. He lay in the mud, rain pelting his face, gasping for breath as the fire continued to consume the structure, despite the downpour. For 45 grueling minutes, Jack battled the fire alone, his clothes soaked with both rain and sweat, his muscles screaming from exertion. The downpour eventually became his ally, helping to douse the flames that had threatened to consume the entire structure. When the last embers sizzled into darkness, Jack stood in the muddy yard, hands on his knees, coughing violently and spitting black phlegm. Half the roof was gone, but the barn still stood. The equipment, his grandfather's restored thresher, the toolboxes, the feet had survived. It was a small victory in a war Jack had been losing for years. He trudged back to the house, leaving muddy footprints on the worn wooden floors that Eleanor had once kept gleaming. 7 years a widower, and still, he sometimes turned to share news with a woman who wasn't there. Eleanor would have known what to do about the farm's financial situation. She had been the practical one, handling the books while he handled the land. Cancer had taken her too quickly for proper goodbyes, but perhaps mercifully quick given their lack of adequate health insurance. The bills had nearly bankrupted him even before the drought, the rising costs of seeds, and the relentless competition from corporate farms. Jack peeled off his soaked flannel shirt, wincing as the movement pulled at his lower back. In the bathroom mirror, he examined the livid scar that ran along his spine, the result of a fusion surgery that was supposed to fix decades of hard labor and military injury. The procedure had cost $87,000, of which his insurance had covered barely half, another debt he couldn't repay. He swallowed 2 pain pills with a glass of tap water, then finished undressing and stepped into the shower. The hot water had long since stopped working reliably, and the cold spray did little to ease his aching muscles. As he dried off, he caught his reflection in the mirror gray hair, deep lines etched around eyes that had once been bright with optimism, a body still strong but betrayed by age and injury. He barely recognized himself anymore, clean but exhausted. He collapsed into his recliner and opened the drawer of the side table, pulling out a stack of papers he'd been avoiding. The most recent notice from First National Bank was printed on ominous red paper. Final notice, foreclosure proceedings. 60 days. That's all the time he had left before the Miller family farm, 4 generations of blood, sweat, and sacrifice would be auctioned to the highest bidder. Jack's calloused finger traced over the amount due $279,843.7. Might as well be $1 billion. The drought had decimated his corn yield for the 3rd consecutive year. The dairy operation barely covered its own costs. His credit cards were maxed out, and his daughter Rachel had made it clear during their last tense phone call that she had her own financial struggles at the hospital where she worked as a doctor in Chicago. Not that she'd want to save this place anyway, Jack muttered to the empty room. Rachel had left for medical school 15 years ago and rarely returned, making excuses about hospital schedules and responsibilities. The truth, which neither of them acknowledged directly, was that the farm represented everything she had fought to escape the limitations, the constant financial stress, the backbreaking work with little reward. He still remembered their last face-to-face argument, 3 Christmases ago. Rachel had broached the subject of selling, presenting figures and market analyses like she was discussing a business transaction rather than their family heritage. "Dad, farmland in this county is selling for $8,000 an acre," she'd insisted, her doctor's precision evident in the way she laid out the facts. "With 320 acres, you could walk away with over $2 million after paying off the mortgage. You could retire comfortably, maybe move somewhere warmer for your back." "This land isn't just an investment," he'd responded, anger rising despite his efforts to remain calm. Your great-grandfather broke this soil during the Dust Bowl. Your grandfather expanded it during the Depression. Your mother is buried under the oak tree by the North Pasture. You can't put a price on that." Rachel's expression had hardened, so like Eleanor when she'd made up her mind. "Actually, Dad, the bank already has 279, 803, 27. And if you don't face reality soon, you'll lose everything with nothing to show for it." She'd been right, of course. Rachel had always been pragmatic like her mother. But Jack Miller had never been one to surrender. Not during 2 tours in Desert Storm, not when Eleanor got sick, and not now, with his legacy hanging by a thread. Jack folded the notice and replaced it in the drawer. Tomorrow was another day, and despite everything, he had never been one to quit before the final bell. Eleanor would have expected nothing less. Morning arrived with clear skies and humid air that promised another scorching day. Jack was in the damaged barn by 5:30 a.m., assessing the destruction in daylight and nailing tarps over the gaping hole in the roof. The physical labor was therapeutic despite the pain that radiated from his lower spine. Physical pain was manageable. It was the weight of impending failure that truly threatened to crush him. The fire damage was worse than he'd initially thought. The electrical system that powered the milking equipment had been completely destroyed. That meant hand-milking his 3 remaining cows, a labor-intensive process that his back wouldn't thank him for. Jack sat heavily on an overturned bucket, calculating costs he couldn't afford. New wiring would run at least $2,000 plus whatever the local electrician, Tom Whelan, would charge for labor. Tom was fair, often accepting payment in installments from struggling farmers. But Jack had already maxed out that goodwill with previous repairs. "One damn thing after another," he muttered, remembering his father's favorite saying about farm life. Harold Miller had weathered his share of disasters, droughts, floods, market crashes, but he'd never faced the systematic dismantling of family farming that Jack had witnessed over the past 20 years. Corporate agriculture had changed the game entirely, transforming what had once been a community of interdependent farmers into isolated operations fighting for survival against impossible odds. The distant rumble of an engine drew his attention around 10 a.m. Jack climbed down from his precarious position on the roof edge and squinted toward the long gravel driveway that connected the farm to the county road. A motorcycle was approaching, its rider leaning into the curves with practiced ease. Jack couldn't remember the last time anyone had visited unannounced. Bill Patterson, his oldest friend and the county sheriff, stopped by occasionally to share a beer and reminisce about their time in Desert Storm. But Bill drove a pickup, not a motorcycle. Door-to-door salesmen had long since written off the remote farmhouses as inefficient targets. That left either someone who was lost or someone with intentions Jack might not appreciate. The motorcycle, a Harley-Davidson, that had seen better days but still gleamed with careful maintenance, came to a stop in the yard. Its rider, dressed in worn leather riding gear despite the heat, killed the engine and removed a black helmet. Jack was surprised to see a woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked dark hair cut in a practical bob. She was trim and fit-looking, with the kind of tan that came from outdoor work rather than tanning beds. As she dismounted, he noticed she moved with the precise economy of someone accustomed to physical labor. "Morning," Jack called out, keeping his tone neutral as he approached. His right hand instinctively checked that his pocket knife was in its usual place. Living alone made a man cautious. "You lost," the woman smiled, crow's feet crinkling around intelligent brown eyes. "Not lost, just temporarily immobilized." She patted the motorcycle's fuel tank. "Conked out about a quarter-mile down your drive. I managed to get her started again, but she's running rough. Electrical system's acting up." Jack studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Her accent wasn't local East Coast maybe, but softened by years elsewhere. "That's private property you broke down on." "I know, and I apologize for the intrusion." She extended her hand. "Tori Reynolds. I was hoping I might trouble you for some tools to check the ignition system. I think last night's storm might have affected the electronics." Jack hesitated before shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, her palms calloused. "Jack Miller, What brings you out this way? Not exactly on the tourist path. Cross-country ride. Clearing my head, Tori gestured toward the distant highway. I was heading toward Dawson when I noticed the storm damage along this stretch. Thought I might find someone who could use an extra pair of hands with repairs before I moved on. Jack's eyebrows rose. You're offering help to strangers, lady. No offense, but that's not how things typically work these days. Tori laughed, a genuine sound that somehow eased Jack's suspicion slightly. I've found that the best way to handle my own problems is to help someone else with theirs first. Call it karma, if you like. She glanced at the barn with its partially tarp-covered roof. Looks like you had some excitement last night. Lightning strike. Jack found himself explaining despite his reservations. Got the fire out before it took the whole structure, but the roof's going to need proper repair before winter. Tori nodded thoughtfully. Lucky save. Mind if I take a look at those tools? I promise I'll be out of your hair as soon as I get my bike running right. Jack hesitated, sizing her up. In his experience, strangers usually wanted something: money, land, or in one memorable case, to sell him on a timeshare in Florida. But this woman seemed different. There was a directness to her gaze, a lack of the usual salesperson's artificial enthusiasm. And if he was being honest with himself, the prospect of company, even briefly, was appealing after months of near isolation. You know motorcycles? He asked, delaying his decision. Built my first one at 16, she replied with a slight smile. Drove my father crazy. He thought it wasn't ladylike. But he was an engineer, so he couldn't help but be a little impressed. Something about her directness and the competent way she carried herself made Jack relent. Besides, what did he have to steal? The farm's most valuable asset was the land itself, and she couldn't exactly put that in her saddlebags. Tools are in the barn. I'll show you. He led her inside, where shafts of sunlight streamed through the damaged roof onto the concrete floor. What kind of help were you looking for exactly? Basic socket set, multimeter if you have one, maybe some electrical tape. She ran her hand along the Harley's handlebars. I rebuilt this engine myself, but the electrical system's been temperamental lately. Jack raised an eyebrow, reassessing her. You rebuild motorcycle engines. Among other things, she smiled enigmatically. I've always been good with my hands. He opened his main toolbox, a heavy steel chest that had been his father's. Inside, the tools were arranged with military precision, each one clean and in its proper place. Jack might be losing his farm, but he'd be damned if he'd let his tools fall into disrepair. Impressive organization, Tori commented, selecting a socket wrench with practiced ease. My father taught me that a man's tools are an extension of himself, Jack replied, then immediately felt foolish for sharing something so personal with a stranger. Tori nodded as if this made perfect sense. My mother said something similar about a woman's mind. She knelt beside the motorcycle and began removing the side panel with swift, practiced movements. Despite his initial reservations, Jack found himself kneeling beside her. Curiosity piqued. It had been years since he'd worked on a motorcycle, but the familiar smell of engine oil and metal brought back memories of his younger days. This is a 2015 Road King. Right, he asked, examining the exposed components. Good eye. Tori sounded impressed. You ride? Not anymore. Used to have a Sportster back before I got married. Eleanor, my wife, worried too much about me on it after we had Rachel. Jack wasn't sure why he was sharing these details with this woman. Perhaps it was the simple pleasure of having a conversation with someone new after months of isolation. Smart woman, you're Eleanor. Tori connected the multimeter to various points in the electrical system, frowning at the readings. Voltage regulator shot. Must have taken a surge during the storm. She looked up at Jack. You wouldn't happen to have a spare lying around? Jack shook his head. Not for a Harley. No. Nearest dealership is in Lincoln, about 2 hours from here. Tori sighed, sitting back on her heels. That's what I was afraid of. I can jury-rig something to get me to town, but I wouldn't trust it for highway speeds. She glanced at her watch. Any chance there's a motel nearby where I could stay while waiting for parts? Nearest motel's in Dawson, 30 miles east. Jack rubbed his chin thoughtfully, feeling the day's stubble. There's a parts store in Millerville, about 15 miles west. Might have something compatible we could adapt. Tori asked, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Jack hadn't meant to involve himself, but something about the challenge appealed to him. It had been too long since he'd solved a problem that didn't involve scraping together mortgage payments or patching ancient equipment. Figure of speech, he said gruffly. Store closes at 5. Won't reopen till Monday now. Tori looked at the darkening sky. It was already late afternoon, and Jack realized they'd been working on the motorcycle longer than he'd thought. Looks like I'm stuck. Then, is there a local taxi service I could call? Jack snorted. In Heartland County, lady, the closest thing to public transportation around here is hitchhiking, and I wouldn't recommend that. He hesitated, weighing his options. The woman seemed genuine enough, and the thought of sending her down the highway on a motorcycle with rigged electronics didn't sit well with him. Eleanor would have his hide for even considering it. I've got a guest room, he said finally. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean. You're welcome to stay the night. Head to Millerville in the morning. Tori looked surprised by the offer. That's incredibly kind, but I couldn't impose. It's not kindness. It's practicality. Jack interrupted. Night's coming, and there's nowhere else within walking distance. Besides, he added with a faint smile, Eleanor would haunt me if I left a woman stranded. Tori studied his face for a moment, then nodded. Thank you. Jack, I accept, on one condition. What's that? Let me cook dinner. I noticed your garden on the way in. Looks like you've got tomatoes and peppers ready for picking. Jack hadn't had a home-cooked meal he hadn't prepared himself in years. The offer was tempting. You any good in the kitchen? Tori's eyes sparkled with amusement. I've been told my chili can make grown men weep with joy. Well, now that's a claim that needs testing. Jack found himself smiling, the expression feeling foreign on his face. You've got yourself a deal, Ms. Reynolds. Together they walked to the small vegetable garden Eleanor had started decades ago, which Jack maintained more out of habit and memory than enthusiasm. Despite his neglect, it produced remarkably well tomatoes heavy on the vine, bell peppers gleaming in the late afternoon sun, jalapenos adding speckles of bright green. This is impressive, Tori remarked, kneeling to examine a particularly robust tomato plant. You're using companion planting marigolds to deter pests, basil to enhance flavor. Jack was surprised by her observation. Eleanor's design. She read all those organic gardening books back when it wasn't fashionable yet. She was ahead of her time, Tori said, gently harvesting a ripe tomato. These methods are gaining recognition, now reducing pesticide dependence, improving soil health naturally. She'd have liked hearing that, Jack said softly. Always felt like she was fighting an uphill battle against the chemical company's sales pitches. They collected a basket of vegetables in companionable silence, the simple task feeling oddly meaningful. Jack couldn't remember the last time he'd shared such a mundane activity with another person. Most of his interactions these days were transactional, terse conversations with bank officials, price negotiations with feed suppliers, the occasional beer with Bill when their schedules aligned. As they headed back toward the house, Jack carrying Tori's small duffel bag despite her protests, the sound of tires on gravel announced another visitor. Jack turned to see an unmarked black sedan rolling up his driveway, dust billowing behind it. Expecting company? Tori asked, her voice suddenly tight. No! Jack's hand instinctively moved toward his pocket knife again. The sedan had government written all over it, black, nondescript, with tinted windows that obscured its occupants. In his experience, unexpected government visitors rarely brought good news. The car stopped, and two men in dark suits emerged. Despite the heat, both wore sunglasses and neutral expressions that had been perfected in some federal training program. The taller one approached, reaching into his jacket pocket to produce a badge. Mr. Miller, I'm Agent Donovan. This is Agent Phillips, FBI. He flashed the badge briefly before returning it to his pocket. Sorry to intrude, but we're conducting an investigation and we're hoping you might be able to help us. Jack felt Tori stiffen beside him. FBI. What's this about? Agent Donovan's gaze shifted to Tori, his expression unreadable behind the sunglasses. And you are, ma'am, Tori Reynolds. Just passing through with motorcycle trouble. Mr. Miller was kind enough to offer assistance. Agent Phillips, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds, would you mind showing some identification? Jack noticed Tori's hesitation, slight but noticeable. Is there a problem, gentlemen? He asked, his Gulf War military bearing automatically reasserting itself. We're looking for a woman who matches Ms. Reynolds' description, Agent Donovan explained, his tone professionally neutral. She's been targeting financially distressed farms in the region, offering investment opportunities that turn out to be sophisticated scams. Several farmers have lost their life savings. Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He glanced at Tori, whose face had gone carefully blank. I have ID in my saddlebag, she said calmly. But I assure you, I'm not who you're looking for. We'll be the judge of that, Agent Phillips replied. Sir, has this woman made any financial proposals to you? No, Jack answered truthfully. Her motorcycle broke down on my property. I offered her tools and a place to stay for the night. That's all. Agent Donovan nodded, but his posture remained tense. We'd still like to see that identification. Ma'am? Tori turned toward her motorcycle, but Jack noticed her hand trembling slightly. Something wasn't right here. The timing was too convenient, and Jack had developed a healthy skepticism of authority during his military service. His mind flashed back to a night outside Basra, when their unit had been approached by men claiming to be Iraqi police. Bill Patterson, always the more suspicious of the two, had noticed inconsistencies in their uniforms. His caution had saved the squad from an ambush. Jack had learned then to trust his instincts about people who weren't what they claimed to be. Actually, he said, stepping slightly in front of Tori, I'd like to see those badges again. More carefully this time. The agents exchanged glances. Mr. Miller, we don't want any trouble. Agent Donovan began. That makes two of us, Jack interrupted. But this is private property, and you gentlemen showed those credentials mighty fast. My friend Bill Patterson is the county sheriff. How about I give him a call? Have him come verify who you are. At the mention of the local sheriff, both men seemed to reconsider their approach. Agent Phillips leaned closer to Donovan, whispering something Jack couldn't hear. That won't be necessary, Agent Donovan said finally. We'll check back with you later. Mr. Miller, in the meantime, he looked pointedly at Tori. I'd be careful about entertaining strangers. Some people aren't who they claim to be. With that cryptic warning, the agents returned to their sedan and drove away, leaving Jack and Tori standing in a cloud of dust and tension. Want to tell me what that was really about? Jack asked once the car was out of sight. Tori's composed expression had cracked, revealing genuine concern. I think we should continue this conversation inside. Jack studied her face, weighing his options. His instincts told him the agents weren't legitimate, but that didn't mean Tori was innocent either. All right, he decided, but I think I'll keep my shotgun handy, just in case. Tori nodded. That's probably wise. I wouldn't trust me either right now. The moment reminded Jack of another lesson from his military days. Sometimes you had to make temporary alliances in uncertain territory. And if there was one thing Jack Miller understood, it was that his farm had become very uncertain territory indeed. Inside the farmhouse, Jack directed Tori to the kitchen while he retrieved his shotgun from the hall closet. It was an old Remington, well-maintained like all his tools, and loaded with 2 shells. He didn't point it at her, but he kept it visible as he entered the kitchen. Nice place, Tori commented, looking around at the modest but clean room. The decor was outdated floral wallpaper from the 90s, Linoleum floor showing wear patterns, but everything was orderly. A framed photograph on the refrigerator showed a younger Jack with a pretty, dark-haired woman and a teenage girl, all smiling against a backdrop of cornfields. "Eleanor's touch," Jack replied, nodding toward the curtains and wall hangings. "Haven't changed much since she passed." "I'm sorry for your loss," Tori said, and Jack was surprised by the genuine empathy in her voice. "Going on 7 years now." He gestured toward a chair at the kitchen table. "Have a seat and explain to me why two men claiming to be FBI agents are looking for you." Tori sat down, placing her hands on the table where Jack could see them. "They weren't FBI. At least, I'm 99% certain they weren't. And you know this how. Real FBI agents would have insisted on seeing my ID, not back down at the mention of a local sheriff." She met his gaze steadily. "Also, their suits were off the rack, and their shoes were wrong." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Their shoes? Government agents wear practical, durable footwear. Those men were wearing Italian leather that costs more than a month's salary for an actual agent." Tori sighed. "They work for my son, Adam. Your son sends men pretending to be federal agents to find you." Jack kept his tone even, but his grip on the shotgun tightened. This woman was either delusional or involved in something very dangerous. "It sounds insane." "I know." Tori ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of frustration that seemed too genuine to be rehearsed. "The short version is that I'm not just Tori Reynolds, motorcycle enthusiast. I'm Victoria Reynolds, majority shareholder of Reynolds Agritech." Jack's eyes widened in recognition. Reynolds Agritech was one of the largest agricultural technology companies in the country, known for its patented seed varieties, fertilizers, and irrigation systems that had transformed industrial farming and driven countless small farmers out of business through pricing strategies that favored large operations. "You're Victoria Reynolds, the Victoria Reynolds." His disbelief was evident. "Lady, if you're Victoria Reynolds, I'm the Queen of England." Victoria reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a slim wallet. From it, she extracted a California driver's license and slid it across the table. Jack picked it up, examining the photo of the woman seated before him, alongside the name Victoria Eleanor Reynolds. "This could be fake," he said, but with less conviction. "Call your sheriff friend if you want verification. I'm not hiding my identity from legitimate authorities." She leaned forward. "Jack, I know how this looks, and I know what Reynolds Agritech represents to farmers like you. But I'm here because I'm trying to change that." Jack studied her face, looking for signs of deception. "Go on." "5 years ago, my husband Thomas died. He was CEO and the visionary behind the company. Our son Adam took over operations." Victoria's expression hardened. "Adam has different priorities. Under his leadership, the company has become increasingly predatory, developing technologies specifically designed to create farmer dependency rather than sustainability." "Tell me something I don't know," Jack muttered. Jack. The dependency cycle was familiar to every farmer: proprietary seeds that couldn't be replanted, specialized fertilizers that altered soil composition to require continual application, equipment that could only be serviced by authorized dealers at exorbitant costs. "What you don't know is that I've been developing an alternative," Victoria continued. "A system called AgriSmart that combines robotics, AI-driven irrigation, and soil analysis to dramatically increase yields while decreasing resource usage: water, fertilizer, pesticides. There are dozens of smart farming systems on the market," Jack pointed out. "None of them affordable for operations my size. That's by design." Victoria's eyes flashed with conviction. "The current business model is subscription-based. Farmers never own the technology. They just rent it perpetually. My system is different. Farmers would own the equipment outright, with a cooperative structure for updates and maintenance." Jack leaned back, skeptical but intrigued despite himself. "And your son doesn't like this idea?" "Adam tried to bury the project. When I protested, he attempted to force me out of the company." Victoria's mouth set in a grim line. "I left voluntarily, but I took the AgriSmart prototype and all its research with me. Legally, I own the intellectual property. I filed the patents under my personal name, not the company's. But Adam doesn't care about legalities when billions in future revenue are at stake. So you're on the run from your corporate CEO's son, who's sending fake federal agents to find you? Jack shook his head. That's quite a story, Miss Reynolds. I know how it sounds. Victoria didn't flinch from his skepticism. But I can prove everything I'm saying. The prototype is in a secure location, but I have the design specifications and test results on my laptop. Jack considered his options. If she was telling the truth, he was harboring a whistleblower from one of the most powerful agricultural corporations in America. If she was lying, well, his life was already circling the drain. What more could he lose? I'm going to make a call, he decided, reaching for his cell phone. If you're who you say you are, you won't mind me checking with someone I trust. Victoria nodded. That's reasonable. While you do that, I'll start on that chili I promised. The conversation might go easier with food in our bellies. As Victoria busied herself in the kitchen, Jack stepped onto the porch, dialing Bill Patterson's number from memory. The friendship between the two men went back nearly 40 years, to their high school days when they'd played football together. They'd enlisted on the same day, served in the same unit during Desert Storm, and while their paths had diverged afterward, Jack returning to the farm, Bill joining the sheriff's department, the bond had remained unbroken. The sheriff answered on the third ring, his voice gruff but friendly. Jack, everything okay out there? Saw the storm hit your area pretty hard last night. I'm fine. Bill, lightning took out part of the barn roof, but I got the fire under control. Jack hesitated, unsure how to frame his question without sounding crazy. Listen, I've got a situation here I could use your help with. Had a visitor today, woman named Victoria Reynolds. Claims she's from Reynolds Agritech. Any way you could run a check on her? There was a pause on the other end. Victoria Reynolds. The Victoria Reynolds. What's she doing at your place? So you've heard of her. Jack, Reynolds Agritech is a Fortune 500 company. Victoria Reynolds is worth over $1 billion, at least she was, until she disappeared from public view a few months back. There were rumors she'd had a falling out with the company leadership. Bill's voice lowered. Is she really there? Jack glanced through the window, where he could see Victoria efficiently chopping vegetables at his kitchen counter. Seems to be. Had some men show up claiming to be FBI, looking for her. Got suspicious when I mentioned your name. Bill swore under his breath. Definitely not FBI then. Real agents would have coordinated with local law enforcement. There was the sound of typing in the background. Let me run a quick check. Yep, Victoria Reynolds. 55, 5'7", dark hair with gray streaks. There's an internal bulletin about her disappearance, but no warrants or charges. Whatever's going on is corporate, not criminal. Thanks, Bill. Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. At least part of her story checked out. Jack, be careful, Bill warned. If she's on the run from Reynolds Agritech, there could be serious money at stake. Those corporate types play hardball. I will. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't harboring a fugitive. Not from the law, anyway. Keep me posted, and call if those fake agents return. That's impersonating federal officers, a felony I'd be happy to charge them with. One more thing, Bill, Jack added, his voice lowering. Have you heard anything about Reynolds Agritech acquiring farmland in the county, particularly for closed properties? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Funny you should ask. Clayton Winters at First National has been pushing foreclosures through faster than normal the past year or so. Word is he's got a buyer lined up for several properties, offering cash deals before they even hit the auction block. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Clayton Winters had been pressing particularly hard on his mortgage. Any idea who the buyer is? Nothing concrete, but there's been a Reynolds Agritech rep staying at the Millerville Inn for the past month. Marcus something. Spends a lot of time with Clayton. Thanks, Bill. I appreciate the intel. Jack. Bill hesitated. Your 60 days, is there anything I can do, Marjorie, and I don't have much saved. But I wouldn't take your retirement money, Bill, Jack interrupted firmly. You've helped enough just by being a friend. I'll figure something out. After ending the call, Jack stood on the porch for a moment, watching the sunset paint the cornfields in golden light. His farm might be failing, but it was still beautiful, still worth fighting for. He wondered what Victoria Reynolds saw when she looked at his struggling acres. Opportunity, a test subject, or something else entirely. When Jack returned to the kitchen, the aroma of simmering chili greeted him, spices, tomatoes, and slow-cooked meat combining in a way that made his stomach growl appreciatively. Victoria had found his mother's old cast-iron pot and had commandeered the stove with the confidence of someone accustomed to working in unfamiliar kitchens. "Your sheriff friend verify my story?" she asked without looking up from her cooking. "Parts of it," Jack set the shotgun aside, a tacit acknowledgement of increased trust. "You're not wanted by actual law enforcement. At least," Victoria smiled faintly. "Small mercies." She stirred the chili, then covered it to simmer. "I meant what I said about AgriSmart. Jack, I've been looking for a test farm somewhere to prove the system works in real-world conditions, not just in controlled experiments." Jack leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "And you just happened to break down on my property. Forgive me if I find that convenient." "Actually, yes." Victoria met his gaze directly. "I've been researching potential test sites throughout the Midwest. Your farm has the right combination of factors: soil composition, crop diversity, size. When I identified the lightning damage this morning, it seemed like serendipity." "Serendipity," Jack repeated dryly. "Ms. Reynolds. Victoria, please. Or Tori, if you prefer." "Victoria," Jack emphasized the name. "I'm not sure what you're proposing exactly, but my farm isn't some corporate test lab. It's my home, my heritage, and frankly, it's hanging by a thread financially." Victoria's expression softened. "I know. First National Bank holds your mortgage, currently in pre-foreclosure, with approximately 60 days remaining before auction. You owe just under $280,000, including penalties and interest." Jack stared at her, stunned. "How could you possibly know that us?" Victoria had the grace to look embarrassed. "I did my research before coming to this region. Public records, agricultural production reports." She hesitated. "And yes, I may have accessed some information through channels that weren't entirely orthodox. You hacked my financial records." Jack felt violated, his earlier suspicions rushing back. "Not personally, no, but I have resources." Victoria's tone was unapologetic. "Jack, I need a farmer who understands what's at stake, not just for individual farms, but for the entire agricultural ecosystem. Someone who has the experience to provide valuable feedback on the technology and the motivation to see it succeed." "And in return," Jack asked, his voice tight with controlled anger, "in return, I would pay a leasing fee for use of a portion of your land as a test site, enough to clear your debt with the bank and provide operating capital for the coming year." Victoria watched his reaction carefully. "This isn't charity, Jack. It's a business proposal. Your expertise has value. So does your land." Jack felt lightheaded. The amount she was casually offering would solve his immediate crisis, giving him time to rebuild. But he'd been farming long enough to know that nothing came without strings. "And what happens if this AgriSmart system doesn't work, or if your son's corporate goons shut it down?" Victoria's expression hardened with determination. "Adam can try, but legally, he has no standing. As for the technology, it works. I've run simulations and controlled tests for 2 years. What I need now is proof in actual farming conditions, with a farmer's practical knowledge guiding refinements." Jack thought of the barn's damaged electrical system, the irrigation equipment that hadn't worked properly in 3 seasons, the ancient tractor that needed constant maintenance, all problems that proper funding could solve. "What exactly would this AgriSmart system involve?" he asked, his resistance beginning to crumble. Victoria's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Three main components. First, autonomous robots, small, solar-powered units that monitor crops at the individual plant level. Identifying disease, pests, or nutrient deficiencies before they become visible to the human eye. Like those weeding robots I've read about, similar, but far more sophisticated. These units can differentiate between crop plants and hundreds of weed species, removing weeds mechanically rather than relying on herbicides. They also collect data continuously, building a comprehensive picture of your field's health. Jack nodded, picturing the technology. And the second component, precision irrigation. Not just drip systems, but targeted delivery based on real-time soil moisture readings and weather predictions. Water usage reductions of up to 70% compared to conventional methods, with improved plant health because roots aren't alternately flooded and parched. The potential water savings alone would be significant. Jack's well had been dropping steadily for years, forcing him to dig deeper at considerable expense. And the third is soil analysis and treatment. Instead of blanket applications of fertilizer, the system identifies exactly what nutrients are needed where, down to the square foot. It can also detect soil compaction, pH imbalances, and microbial health, allowing for targeted interventions rather than wholesale treatments. I'd need to see more details before agreeing to anything, Jack said cautiously. Of course, Victoria nodded. After dinner, I can show you the technical specifications, test results, everything. You can make an informed decision. Jack was about to respond when his phone rang. He checked the display, Rachel. His daughter rarely called unprompted, and never on a Saturday evening. I need to take this, he said, stepping into the living room for privacy. Hello, Rachel. Dad. His daughter's voice sounded strained. Is everything okay there? Fine. Why? I just got a strange call from someone claiming to be from the bank. They were asking questions about the farm, whether you were considering selling, if you had visitors recently. Jack's blood ran cold. What did you tell them? Nothing. Obviously, I told them to contact you directly about any financial matters. Rachel paused. Dad, what's going on? Is the farm situation worse? Jack sighed, torn between protecting his daughter from worry and being honest about his circumstances. The situation's the same as it's been. Rachel, struggling, but managing. The lie tasted bitter, but he couldn't bring himself to admit how close he was to losing everything. Are you sure? Because this caller knew things like that. The barn was damaged in last night's storm. They said they were assessing potential increased risk to their investment. First National doesn't make personal calls like that, especially not on weekends. Jack's mind raced. Adam Reynolds' people, gathering intelligence. Rachel, listen to me. If anyone contacts you again asking about the farm, don't tell them anything. And maybe it's best if you don't come visit for a while. Visit? Rachel gave a short, humorless laugh. Dad, I haven't been home in over a year, and you know why. The old tension crackled between them. Unresolved arguments about the farm's future. Rachel's insistence that he sell years ago when the market was better. His stubborn refusal to consider alternatives. I know, Jack said quietly. I'm just saying, things might be a bit complicated right now. Complicated how, Dad? What aren't you telling me? Jack glanced toward the kitchen, where Victoria was serving up bowls of chili, seemingly unconcerned with his private conversation, but undoubtedly within earshot. I've got a potential business opportunity, he said vaguely. Still in early discussions? What kind of opportunity? Rachel's skepticism was evident. Not another one of those seed dealerships that nearly bankrupted you 3 years ago. No, nothing like that. Look, I'll tell you more when there's something concrete to tell. Jack tried to steer the conversation away from dangerous territory. How are things at the hospital? Don't change the subject. Dad. Rachel's voice took on the professional edge she used with difficult patience. The last time you had a business opportunity, you invested your equipment maintenance fund In a seed distributorship that went bankrupt within 6 months? Jack winced at the memory. It had been a desperate gamble during another financial crisis, one that had ultimately accelerated his current problems. This is different. Rachel, how is it different? When Jack didn't immediately respond, she sighed. Dad, please. I worry about you out there alone, making these decisions without anyone to talk them through with. The concern in her voice penetrated Jack's defensive shell. Rachel might disagree with his choices, but she loved him. That had never been in question. It's an agricultural technology project, he admitted. A new approach to precision farming that could significantly reduce water usage and input costs while improving yields. That sounds actually promising, Rachel said, surprise evident in her tone. Who's behind it? Jack hesitated. A private investor with experience in the field. And what do they want from you? Because nobody invests in struggling farms out of charity. Dad, they need a test site for a new system they've developed. My farm has the right conditions, and I have the experience to provide valuable feedback. Jack found himself echoing Victoria's pitch, surprised at how reasonable it sounded when he said it aloud. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Get everything in writing, she finally said, and have a lawyer review any contracts before you sign. I will. Despite their differences, Jack knew her advice came from a place of love. Take care of yourself, Rachel. You too, Dad. And, she hesitated, maybe call Dr. Brennan about refilling your medication properly. I know you've been stretching it. Jack smiled ruefully. His daughter knew him too well. I'll think about it. After ending the call, Jack returned to the kitchen, where Victoria had set the table with a domesticity that seemed at odds with her claimed billionaire status. 2 bowls of chili steamed invitingly, accompanied by corn muffins she must have found in his freezer and warmed in the oven. Everything okay? She asked, noticing his troubled expression. Your son's people contacted my daughter, asking questions about the farm. Jack's voice was flat. They're thorough. I'll give them that. Victoria's expression darkened. I'm sorry, Jack. Adam has resources I can't match, not while I'm trying to stay under the radar. Why come to me? Then why not approach one of those big experimental farms with security and resources? Because they're already in bed with companies like Reynolds Agritech. Victoria gestured for him to sit. The industrial agricultural complex is incestuous, same investors, same board members, same profit-driven mindset. I need someone outside that system, someone with integrity and practical knowledge who understands what farming should be about. Jack sat down, eyeing the chili skeptically, despite its enticing aroma. And you determined I have integrity from your research. Victoria smiled slightly. 4 generations on the same land through dust bowls, recessions, and corporate consolidation. You could have sold out a dozen times over, but you didn't. That says something about a person, or about their stubborn foolishness, Jack muttered. But he picked up his spoon. The chili was, as promised, exceptional, spicy enough to make his eyes water slightly, but complex in flavor, with hints of chocolate and cinnamon beneath the heat. Jack couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something prepared with such care. This is good, he admitted between bites. Really good. Thomas and I spent a year in Texas early in our marriage, Victoria explained. I learned from the best. A shadow crossed her face at the mention of her late husband. He would be devastated to see what Adam's done with the company. Thomas believed technology should empower farmers, not enslave them. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the tension between them easing slightly with shared food and implied truces. Outside, darkness had settled over the farm, the silence broken only by the occasional lowing of cows and the persistent chirp of crickets. After dinner, Jack said finally, I want to see everything, all your research, the system specifications, the proposed agreement, no secrets, no surprises. Victoria nodded, relief evident in her expression. Absolutely. Full transparency. And I want to know more about these land acquisitions Reynolds Agritech has been making. Bill tells me Clayton Winters at First National has been pushing for closures through faster than normal, with a cash buyer waiting in the wings. A buyer who happens to have a Reynolds Agritech representative acting as intermediary. Victoria's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Marcus Delgado. Jack shrugged. Bill didn't know the last name, just that he's been staying at the Millerville Inn, spending a lot of time with Clayton. Tall, angular face. Always wears bow ties. When Jack nodded, Victoria's expression hardened. That's Marcus. He's Adam's right-hand man, handles the sensitive transactions that can't have the Reynolds name attached directly. She set down her spoon. Jack, if Marcus is involved, this is worse than I thought. He's not just acquiring random distressed properties, he's targeting specific farms. For what purpose? I don't know for certain, but I have suspicions. 3 years ago, Adam commissioned a geological survey of this region. He never shared the results with the board, claiming they were inconclusive. But he's been unusually interested in this county ever since. Jack felt a chill. You think there's something valuable under these farms? Oil, natural gas. Victoria shook her head. Not in the traditional sense, but water-deep aquifer access is becoming more valuable than oil in many agricultural regions. And there's another possibility that concerns me more. What's that? Adam has been developing a new class of GMO crops that require very specific soil conditions to express their modified traits. If testing identified this region as ideal, she left the implication hanging. Jack understood immediately. He could be consolidating land to create massive test fields, bypassing regulatory oversight by keeping it all under Reynolds Agritech control. Exactly. Victoria's eyes met his across the table. Jack, I don't just want to test AgriSmart on your farm. I want to stop whatever Adam is planning here, but to do that, I need more information and your help. Jack wasn't naive enough to believe that Victoria Reynolds, billionaire heiress and corporate fugitive, was being completely forthcoming. But for the first time in months, he felt something he had almost forgotten purpose. Whether it aligned with hers remained to be seen. After they finished eating and cleaned up the kitchen together, Victoria washing dishes with the same efficiency she had shown repairing her motorcycle, they moved to the living room. Victoria retrieved her laptop from her duffel bag and set it on the coffee table. Before I show you this, she said, her expression serious, I need to know you understand the stakes. If Adam discovers I've approached you, he'll do whatever it takes to shut us down. There could be legal threats, financial pressure, even attempts at sabotage. Jack met her gaze steadily. Ms. Reynolds, I've been fighting to keep this farm alive for the past decade against drought, corporate agriculture, rising costs, and my own physical limitations. Threats don't scare me anymore. Victoria studied his face for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw. She opened the laptop and entered a complex password. Then let me show you what AgriSmart can do. As the screen illuminated with diagrams, data charts, and 3D models of sleek agricultural robots, Jack Miller found himself standing at a crossroads. Down one path lay the certain loss of his family legacy. Down the other, a partnership with a woman he barely knew, fighting against one of the most powerful agricultural corporations in the country. It wasn't much of a choice at all. The AgriSmart system, as Victoria explained over the next 2 hours, was more sophisticated than Jack had initially imagined. The autonomous robots about the size of shoeboxes with solar panels and multi-jointed appendages could navigate between crop rows without damaging plants, performing tasks from mechanical weeding to targeted pollination. Their cameras and sensors collected data continuously, building a comprehensive digital model of the farm's health. Each robot covers approximately 1 acre per day, Victoria explained, showing Jack a simulation of their movement patterns. They recharge at solar stations placed at field edges, requiring no external power source. What about maintenance breakdowns? Jack had seen too many fancy machines fail in harsh field conditions. Modular design. Victoria pulled up a schematic showing how each component could be easily swapped. Most repairs can be done in minutes with basic tools, and the system is designed for redundancy if one unit fails. Others redistribute its workload. The irrigation system was equally impressive, a network of sensors and precisely controlled valves that could deliver water directly to root zones based on real-time moisture readings and crop needs. Weather prediction algorithms would automatically adjust watering schedules to account for incoming rain or drought conditions. Water usage reductions in test plots averaged 68% compared to conventional irrigation, Victoria said, showing charts from controlled experiments. With corresponding yield increases of 22% due to optimal moisture conditions, Jack whistled softly. Those numbers would transform my operation. He studied the data critically, looking for signs of manipulation or exaggeration, but the methodology appeared sound. What about cost? He asked finally, coming to the question that had killed most innovations for small farmers. What would a system like this run commercially? Victoria hesitated. The prototype cost approximately $1.2 million to develop. Jack laughed humorlessly. So about $195,000 more than I could ever afford. That was R&D costs, including all the failed iterations, Victoria clarified. Production models would be far less expensive. My goal is a complete system for under $100,000 with financing options that would make monthly payments less than what farmers currently spend on water, pesticides, and fertilizer combined. Still beyond his reach, but potentially viable for farms that weren't already drowning in debt. Jack scrolled through more documentation, impressed despite his skepticism. And your proposal for my farm specifically, Victoria pulled up a new document. I would provide a complete AgriSmart system at no cost to you. In exchange, you would allow me to collect performance data and make necessary adjustments. You would maintain full control over your farming decisions, what to plant, when to harvest, etc. The system would merely execute your instructions more efficiently. In the financial arrangements, a leasing fee of $300,000 for the first year, with options to extend annually at rates we would negotiate based on system performance? Victoria met his gaze directly. Enough to clear your mortgage and provide operating capital. Jack tried not to react to the figure, though it represented salvation for his immediate crisis. And what happens after the test period? You take the equipment back and I'm right where I started. No, Victoria shook her head firmly. If the system performs as expected, you would have the option to purchase it at a greatly reduced rate or continue the leasing arrangement. My goal isn't to create another dependency cycle, Jack. It's to prove that sustainable technology can be economically viable for family farms. It sounded too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. Jack had learned that lesson through decades of farming. Nobody gave something for nothing, especially not in agriculture. Why me? He asked bluntly. With your resources, you could approach any farmer in the country. Why choose a struggling operation on the verge of foreclosure? Victoria closed the laptop, considering her response carefully. 3 reasons. First, practical, your farm has the ideal conditions for testing. Second, strategic, your location places you at the center of Adam's land acquisition pattern, which can't be coincidence. And third, she paused. I researched you, Jack. Your reputation in this community, your farming practices, your history of innovation despite limited resources. You're exactly the kind of farmer this technology was designed to help. Later that night, after Victoria had retired to the guest room, Jack sat alone on his porch, watching the stars and contemplating the bizarre turn his life had taken in a single day. His back ached, a reminder of his physical vulnerability, but his mind was clearer than it had been in months. The AgriSmart system, if it performed as Victoria claimed, could revolutionize small-scale farming. Autonomous robots that could identify and remove weeds individually rather than spraying entire fields with herbicides. Irrigation systems that delivered water directly to root systems in precisely calibrated amounts. Soil sensors that could detect nutrient deficiencies at the microbiome level? It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But the technical specifications had been impressively detailed, the test results meticulously documented, and the proposed compensation for using his farm as a test site was generous enough to solve his immediate financial crisis without being suspiciously excessive. Jack's phone lay heavy in his hand. He had one more call to make before he could allow himself to hope. Dialing Rachel's number, he prepared himself for a difficult conversation. "Dad," she answered quickly, concern evident in her voice. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Rachel." Jack took a deep breath. "But I need to tell you about this business opportunity, and I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." There was a brief pause. "Okay," Rachel said cautiously. "I'm listening." As Jack explained Victoria's presence and proposal, leaving out the more dramatic elements involving corporate espionage and fake federal agents, he could almost hear his daughter's medical training kicking in her analytical mind, assessing possibilities and risks. "Let me get this straight," Rachel said when he finished. "Victoria Reynolds of Reynolds Agritech is in our farmhouse right now, offering to pay off the mortgage in exchange for testing some new agricultural system she's developed." "That's the simplified version." "Yes." "Dad, this sounds—" Rachel hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "It sounds too convenient. Reynolds Agritech has been putting small farmers out of business for decades. Why would their founder suddenly want to help? She's not exactly representing the company anymore," Jack explained. "There's been a philosophical disagreement between her and the current leadership." "Even so," Rachel's skepticism was evident. "Have you verified any of this? Her identity, her claims about this technology? Bill ran a check on her. She is who she says she is. As for the technology, I've seen the research, the prototypes. It's legitimate." "Rachel, and what does she get out of this arrangement beyond data and a test site?" Jack considered the question. It was one he'd asked Victoria directly. "She gets proof of concept under real farming conditions. If AgriSmart performs as expected, she plans to release it through a cooperative model that bypasses traditional corporate distribution channels." "That's, actually kind of revolutionary," Rachel admitted. "But Dad, please be careful. Get a lawyer to review any contracts before you sign. Make sure you're protected if this goes sideways." "I will." Jack was surprised by her relative lack of opposition. "I thought you'd tell me I was crazy for considering it." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "A year ago, I probably would have. But I've been seeing things at the hospital corporate influence affecting patient care decisions, insurance companies dictating treatments. It's made me reconsider some of my positions on how these systems work." She paused. "Plus, I know how much the farm means to you. If there's a legitimate way to save it, I want that for you." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. It was the closest Rachel had come in years to understanding his attachment to the land. "Thank you, sweetheart. Just promise me you'll be careful and keep me updated." "I promise." Jack ended the call feeling a strange mixture of trepidation and hope. Tomorrow, he would give Victoria his answer. Tonight, he would allow himself to imagine a future where Miller Farms survived another generation, not as a relic of the past, but as a pioneer of a new approach to agriculture. As Jack rose to go inside, he noticed a light in the barn that shouldn't have been there. Frowning, he retrieved his shotgun from beside the door and moved cautiously across the yard. The night was quiet, too quiet, he realized. The crickets had stopped chirping. Someone was in his barn, and it wasn't Victoria, whose shadow he could still see moving about in the guest room window. Jack moved silently, years of hunting experience guiding his steps as he approached the barn door, which stood slightly ajar, a thin line of light spilling onto the ground. Inside, he could hear someone moving, the soft click of computer keys, muttered words he couldn't make out. Jack tightened his grip on the shotgun and prepared to confront whoever had invaded his property and potentially his future. The barn door creaked slightly as Jack eased it open wider, revealing a scene that momentarily confused him. A man in an expensive suit was hunched over a laptop set up on a makeshift desk created from hay bales. The surrounding area had been transformed into a temporary workspace with satellite communication equipment, camera gear with telephoto lenses, and what appeared to be surveillance monitors showing different angles of Jack's property. The man spun around at the sound of the door, his hand moving toward an inside pocket. Jack raised the shotgun. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. The barrel pointed squarely at the intruder's chest. "Hands where I can see them." The man slowly raised his hands, his expression transforming from surprise to a practiced calm. He was perhaps 40, with the lean, hungry look of a corporate climber, slick-back hair, manicured nails, and a bow tie that seemed wildly out of place in a Nebraska barn. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice carrying the polished tones of expensive education. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'm Marcus Delgado, representing Reynolds Agricultural Technologies. I was hoping to speak with you about a potential business opportunity. By breaking into my barn in the middle of the night," Jack kept the shotgun steady. "That's not how business gets done around here. Mr. Delgado," Marcus smiled thinly. "Unconventional circumstances call for unconventional approaches. May I lower my hands? I'm unarmed." "Keep them where I can see them," Jack replied, "and explain exactly what you're doing on my property." "Gathering information," Marcus said simply. "Reynolds Agritech has an interest in acquiring farmland in this region. Your property is particularly significant to our plans. So significant you couldn't wait until morning and knock on my door like a civilized person?" Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We had intelligence suggesting Victoria Reynolds might have contacted you. I needed to verify that information before approaching you formally." Jack's expression revealed nothing, but his mind was racing. These people had been monitoring his farm before Victoria's arrival, which meant her appearance might not have been the coincidence she claimed. "And why would Victoria Reynolds contacting me be of interest to you?" Jack asked, playing ignorant. "Mrs. Reynolds is experiencing some health issues that have affected her judgment," Marcus said smoothly. "She's been making unfounded accusations against the company and approaching farmers with promises of miraculous technology that doesn't exist. Her son is quite concerned about her welfare. Concerned enough to send fake FBI agents to find her." A flicker of surprise crossed Marcus's face before he could mask it. "I'm not aware of any such incident. Perhaps Mrs. Reynolds has been embellishing her narrative." "I think you should leave," Jack said, gesturing toward the door with the shotgun. "And take your surveillance equipment with you. Mr. Miller, I'm authorized to offer you $1.2 million for your property over 4 times its current market value." Marcus's voice took on an urgent tone. "This is a one-time offer that expires at midnight. I suggest you consider it carefully, given your financial situation." The sum was staggering enough to pay off his debts with a substantial cushion remaining. Jack could buy a comfortable home in town, maybe even help Rachel with her student loans. It was a lifeline many struggling farmers would grab without hesitation. "And if I refuse," Marcus shrugged, his casualness betrayed by the tension in his shoulders, "then the foreclosure proceeds as scheduled. First National will auction the property, and Reynolds Agritech will likely acquire it anyway at a much lower price. I might add." "Get out," Jack said quietly, his resolve hardening. "And tell Adam Reynolds that Miller Farm isn't for sale at any price." Marcus began packing his equipment with practiced efficiency. "You're making a mistake. Mr. Miller, Victoria Reynolds can't help you. Whatever she's promised, she can't deliver?" "Maybe not," Jack acknowledged. "But at least she had the decency to knock on my front door instead of sneaking around my property like a thief." As Marcus prepared to leave, Jack added one final warning. "And if I see any more of Reynolds Agritech's people on my land without invitation, I won't be as hospitable. Trespassing laws are taken seriously around here." After Marcus had driven away, his sleek sedan disappearing down the dark driveway, Jack carefully examined the barn. The surveillance setup had been professional cameras positioned to monitor the house, driveway, and fields. One was still active, its red light blinking accusingly from the corner of the hayloft. Jack disabled it with a swing of a hammer, then methodically searched for others. Finding 3 more hidden devices, each met the same fate. By the time he returned to the house, it was past midnight, and the evening's events had only reinforced his determination. Whatever game Victoria and Adam Reynolds were playing, Jack Miller was no longer merely a pawn. He was choosing his side, for better or worse. The next morning dawned bright and clear, promising another scorching day. Jack was already at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, when Victoria appeared in the doorway. She was dressed in the same practical clothes as the day before, but her expression was guarded, as if sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "You look like you've been up for hours." "Never went to bed," Jack replied, gesturing for her to join him. "Had an interesting visitor last night after you turned in. Marcus Delgado sends his regards." Victoria's face paled. Marcus was here in the house. In the barn, had quite the surveillance operation, set up cameras, satellite equipment, the works. Jack watched her reaction carefully. "Been there for a while from the looks of it. Before you arrived?" Victoria sank into a chair opposite him. "Jack, I swear I didn't know. If Adam has been monitoring your farm specifically..." She trailed off, her expression troubled. "He offered me $1.2 million for the property," Jack said flatly. 4 times market value, according to him. "Did you accept?" Victoria's voice was carefully neutral. "No," Jack met her gaze steadily. "But it makes me wonder what both sides of the Reynolds family want with my failing farm. Must be something pretty valuable to justify that kind of offer." Victoria was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing her response. "I told you Adam commissioned a geological survey of this region 3 years ago," she finally said. "What I didn't tell you is that I've been trying to get my hands on those results ever since. I believe he found something significant, something worth consolidating land for. And your AgriSmart system, is that real? Or just a convenient cover story?" "It's real." Victoria's eyes flashed with conviction. "Everything I showed you last night is genuine. But yes, I also want to stop whatever Adam is planning. The 2 goals aren't mutually exclusive." Jack nodded slowly. "I've made my decision. I'll partner with you on this AgriSmart project, but with conditions. Name them. First, complete transparency from this point forward. No more convenient omissions or half-truths." Jack's tone was firm. "Second, I want a proper contract, reviewed by my lawyer, with clear terms about equipment ownership after the test period. And third, I want to know exactly what Adam Reynolds is after. If my farm is sitting on something valuable, I deserve to know what it is." Victoria extended her hand across the table. "Agreed, on all counts." As they shook hands, sealing their unlikely alliance, Jack Miller felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting to win. And with Victoria Reynolds' resources and his own stubborn determination, they might just have a chance against the corporate machine that had been systematically destroying family farms like his for decades. What neither of them realized was that Marcus Delgado had left one final surveillance device in Jack's tractor, a place they hadn't thought to check. And as they discussed their partnership, their conversation was being transmitted directly to Adam Reynolds' office in California, where the CEO of Reynolds Agritech was already planning his countermove. The chess game for the future of Miller Farm, and perhaps the future of American agriculture, had begun in earnest. 4 months after that fateful storm, Jack Miller stood among rows of corn taller and healthier than any he'd seen in a decade. The gleaming AgriSmart robots moved silently between stalks, more reliable than the migrant workers he could never afford to hire. His arthritic hands no longer ached from fighting weeds that now surrendered to precision technology rather than chemicals. He had kept the land, but lost something of its simplicity. Victoria had kept her technology, but surrendered the corporate fortress that once protected her. Both carried fresh scars from the battle with Adam Reynolds, a war fought with legal papers, midnight sabotage, and corporate espionage that had nearly cost them everything. The victory had been narrow and the price steep. Reynolds' Agritech stock had plummeted when Victoria exposed Adams' secret plans to monopolize the aquifer beneath Nebraska's farmland. The cooperative of small farmers now controlled their own destinies, their own water, their own futures. Jack's weathered fingers intertwined with Victoria's as they watched the sunset paint golden light across land that would now pass to the next generation, not as a burden, but as a testament. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unlikely sources: a broken motorcycle, a desperate farmer, a wealthy woman seeking redemption. In the end, perhaps that's what the American heartland has always been, not just a place where crops grow, but where second chances take root in stubborn soil.